Recently I asserted that the Cutlass is the ultimate indoor close combat hand weapon, not including firearms of course. And some people in the comments said, Matt, what about the WAKIZASHI, or indeed the Gladius? But they talked about other short swords. So here I'm going to say why I think that yes indeed, the Cutlass completely kicks the butt of the WAKIZASHI, and I'm going to explain why here. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and Easton Antique Arms. Now, first up we have to say these are from different cultures and to some degree are from different periods as well. The WAKIZASHI has been around since the 15th century really, and you could say as it's a shorter cousin of the Uchigatana from the 15th century, and they are together, the WAKIZASHI and the Uchigatana, are shorter cousins of the Tachi, which goes all the way back to the 9th century. So you could say this is a kind of an ancient weapon, or at least has ancient roots. The Cutlass, not so much. It's obviously primarily an 18th and 19th century type of sword, but it does have roots in the 15th, 16th century at least via the Dusak, and the Dusak is the sort of ancestor, shall we say, of the Cutlass, and really does pretty much the same thing in quite a similar format. Slightly different hilt design, but it basically achieves all of the same goals with the same materials and the same levels of protection and size and everything else like that. So, quite simply, why do I think that the Cutlass is way better overall than a WAKIZASHI as an indoor combat weapon? Well, you will notice that one of the points that I raised in that previous video was regarding the guard, the hand guard. Okay, this isn't the only point, but it's the obvious difference between these two things, is that the Cutlass has a whopping great handguard, which is a major advantage against other weapons, because if people are thrusting, cutting, swinging things at you, having a good old big handguard there makes it way easier to defend. It means you can defend at the base of the blade more safely. And this is called the strong. Now, in terms of leverage, for anyone who doesn't fence, who doesn't know this is the weak, this is the medium, this is the strong. Some fencing systems divide the sword into even more parts, but in my classes, I tend to just simplify it down to 3, which for the purposes of sabre and cutlass, which is what I'm usually teaching, or indeed longsword, it suffices. So strong, medium and weak. What does that mean? This is called weak because this is the end of a lever. Okay, this is called strong because this is the base of the lever. So if I'm receiving a blow, either point down or point up here, and I receive the blow at the base of the blade, I'm not going to get into edge or flat here. Okay, it doesn't really matter. The base of the lever, then that's close to my hand and I've got an awful lot of strength. If I receive a blow anywhere on the blade further up here, it's more likely to collapse my guard. So, being able to take blows on the base of the blade close to the hand is an advantage, and one of the things that facilitates that is having a good handguard. Why? Because if I was to do this with a WAKIZASHI, as this antique example here, I've got basically no handguard, so it would be incredibly risky to my hands, and for that reason, with simpler bladed, or rather simpler guarded blades, like the WAKIZASHI or certain types of Filipino weapon or whatever, we tend to, and indeed medieval swords, we tend to see more actions higher up in the middle of the blade most of the time, and indeed beating aside, slapping aside, these sorts of actions, deflections and beats, because these kind of blocking actions close to the hand are very risky if you don't have a proper, or at least a very big, handguard. Secondly, as mentioned in my previous video, you can't really strike with that, not to any noticeable degree. Yes, you can punch someone. However, I'll just put the WAKIZASHI down for a second. I'll pick up a different cutlass here, just for your interest. So this is actually a police cutlass, a Thames River police cutlass. If you've got some form of knuckle bow here, especially if you've got sidebars or a complete bowl guard like the Royal Navy Cutlass here, then clearly you can punch people and it's essentially like a knuckle duster. Okay, it's not what it's intended for. It's intended to protect your hand from blows, but absolutely it's a better striking weapon. So in terms of smashing and hitting, you've got also a pommel with these, the Cutlass is better than the WAKIZASHI. Now there are some other reasons, and some of you might be expecting me to maybe be talking about the point, or the fact that the Cutlass tends to be a little bit longer than a typical WAKIZASHI. It depends on the specific example. example. So the police, if we just get the wakizashi out here for a second, the police sword of the wakizashi, okay, the police sword is very slightly longer, but if we go for a more typical Royal Navy cutlass, then it's quite a bit longer, so it has a reach advantage. But of course that's a case of, as we would say in England, swings and roundabouts, because or you can say it's a double-edged sword, because having more reach is great outdoors, but in a confined space it might be better to have a short blade. So I'm not going to talk about reach. I'm not going to talk about the point, because frankly a wakizashi can cut really well, can thrust really well, just as a cutlass can. But what I am going to talk about, and this might surprise some of you, is the material of the blade. So this is not me belittling or kind of bad-mouthing Japanese swords. They are made in a very characteristic way, and they end up with very good quality hard steel at the edge. Okay, so very often a traditional Japanese sword will be about 60 Rockwell at the edge, where one of those cutlasses might only be 40 Rockwell at the edge. So they are harder at the edge, and that's where their fame for sharpness and edge hardness comes from. But this comes at a great cost. It comes at the cost of brittleness. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with metallurgy, if you just think about something like glass here, so glass is very hard, it can be very sharp, it can really cut you really nasty, but it breaks quite easily. Now, this doesn't break as easily as that, and bear in mind that the hardness of a Japanese blade is only on the hamon, only on the edge, and the back is much, much softer and resilient. And in fact, if I bent a wakizashi, it would bend. You might find it gets a crack in the hard edge, for the reasons of brittleness that I mentioned. So, overall, I don't consider a Japanese blade anywhere near as durable as a cutlass. The fact is, yes, this has a slightly softer edge, but it can still be made super sharp, and it will certainly do all of the normal things you want it to do. So while the wakizashi might have a superior edge retention and edge hardness, it comes, in my view, at a great cost of durability. And the cutlass has a much more durable steel blade. And it's not just the blade either. I consider the hilt construction, especially when we have a metallic grip like many cutlasses have, and the examples that I showed here. This actually has a cast iron grip. So you've got a cast iron grip, an iron guard, flexible steel blade that flexes like a spring. This is just a much tougher and more durable weapon than a wakizashi is. Now, just to bring back some balance so that all of you people who are big fans of Japanese weapons out, and I do collect them and I do love them, there is one advantage to having this small guard and having a weapon which is overall a little bit smaller and lighter, and that is it's easier to wear, easier to draw, and it doesn't get in the way quite as much. In other words, it's just a lot more convenient to have moving around. So a cutlass with its bigger guard does get in the way more and potentially can impede you drawing it quickly. Whereas obviously, famously in Japanese martial arts, we've got EI and we've got the specialized design of the sword and wearing of the saya or scabbard such that they can be deployed very, very quickly. And it's very important to remember that in real self-defense or even war situations, very often the weapon doesn't start in your hand, it starts in its scabbard, or in the case of a firearm, in its holster. And accessing the weapon can be as important and be a life or death matter compared to the size of the weapon or the handguard or anything like this. So if you get your weapon out before the other person's got their weapon out, in that moment, you're armed, they're not armed, they're unarmed. Okay, so there we go. I do think the wakizashi is a great indoor weapon, and obviously in Japan it was used in that way when the katana was put aside. And sometimes it was used in preference to the longer sword in certain environments and by certain soldiers. So yes, the wakizashi is a great short sword, and there are other great short swords like the Gladius. Maybe we'll talk about the Gladius in the future soon. And I have spoken about it in the past, so you can search in my previous videos. So yes, the wakizashi is great. Yes, of course, the Gladius is great. But I'm afraid, folks, you haven't persuaded me otherwise. I haven't heard a single argument so far that dissuades me from believing that the Cutlass is absolutely the best edged hand weapon that has been devised for close, small, constrained space or indoor combat with a weapon in your hand. I don't think there's anything better than a Cutlass or its very close relatives like the Dussac. Do you still disagree? Let's see your comments down below, and of course it might spur me on to make another video on a related topic. Maybe I should look at Gladii again as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I will be next time as well. Make sure you're subscribed. Please give me a like if you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Take care, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.